by thanking Rev G for giving me this coveted speaking spot of Friday of a 5-day week. That's a real privilege. That's a joke that'll pay off later. I wanted to share some thoughts about Tara Westover's Educated. As I was reading it, there was a word that, as far as I remember, never appeared on the page, yet suffused every chapter of the book. Patriarchy. The word patriarchy literally means rule of the fathers. It has its roots in nomadic herding civilizations that are chronicled in the Old Testament of the Bible. But our current use comes with a fair amount of political freight. So I wanted to offer a definition that might help us examine how patriarchy ran through Educated. My definition of patriarchy is this: reflexive male leadership, an expectation of deference to that leadership, and the structures that perpetuate it. In other words, male leadership that exists because it is male, cannot be challenged because it is male, and has institutions and ideas that keep it going. The clearest example of this in the book is Westover's father. You don't have to play armchair psychiatrist to see the various markers of mental illness in it. There's the seasonal depression, the manic episodes, the paranoia. There is also the steadfast refusal to accept legitimate criticism. Like everyone else who read the book, I'm amazed anyone survived that household. And much of that came from the reckless disregard for basic safety that the father oddly insisted upon. Interestingly, the only character to directly challenge her father was Sean. Sean was the other powerful marker of how patriarchy functioned in that household. Whatever Sean's merits as a construction foreman, his behavior towards his sisters and the various women he dated and then married was a textbook of emotional and physical abuse. When Tara Westover brought this to the attention of her parents, she was the one ostracized. She was the one cast out of the family. Sean's authority as an older sibling, male sibling, could not be challenged. And that's the thing about patriarchy. It exists because it exists. Male authority is understood to be authority because it's male. Once you begin to question the lack of logic there, it could fall apart. Tara's questioning of her brother was not an explicit questioning of her father, but it was in fact an implicit challenge. If Sean was an abuser, and he most certainly was, what was her father? The man who denied her an education, the man who nearly killed her several times through his carelessness, the man who ruled over their family, not because he was wise or just, but because he was the father. Think about the mother. By the end of the book, she's an accomplished businesswoman. She runs a vibrant going concern from their home. Yet, when Tara confronts her with allegations of abuse by Sean, she is unable to find her own voice. In the end, her husband's voice becomes the voice of the family. You might also recall that after the father blows himself up and her mother becomes a successful homeopathic healer, the women who work for Tara's mother cluster around the father to hear the story. In that world, there is only one voice, and that voice is male. Now, to be clear, there is nothing intrinsically wrong with male leadership. People who criticize critics of patriarchy suggest that they want to eliminate male leadership. Maybe some of them do, but that's not what this is really about. Remember that patriarchy bestows leadership based on gender, not ability or worth. You don't earn the right to lead. Your actions and character don't bestow you with legitimacy. The fact that you were male does. Before we go further, I want to back up a little bit and change the focus. When my sons were born, I wanted to establish what it meant to be an honorable man, so that I could have an idea how to raise them to be good men. I settled on this. A man knows what his strength is, mental, moral, physical, and puts that strength to the benefit of something bigger than himself. As I thought about this, I realized that this was not a description of a man, but an adult. Small children can't see the world beyond their own perspective. As we grow, we see a broader perspective, and eventually we realize that we are enlarged by our connection to that broader perspective. So going back to patriarchy, we can look at the specific problem of making assumptions about what leadership should be, but we should also consider the problem of any sort of unearned authority. When I tried to come up with a model of being an honorable man, I accidentally stumbled upon honorable adulthood. In talking about patriarchy, I guess what I'm talking about is privilege. Privilege is a word that I think is almost purposefully problematic. It's kind of a cup of ice water in the cognitive face. Very few people think of themselves as privileged unless they make that a perspective about their life. I feel privileged to be a teacher. That's a choice about my life. That's different than being called privileged by someone else. Privilege is when you are given something without earning it. Westover's father didn't earn the authority over his family. He was given it by virtue of being male. Patriarchy is therefore the bestowing of authority without earning it, privilege. When you show up here at Taft, we like to say that you're privileged to be here, and that's true, but you've also presumably worked hard to get here too. It doesn't feel like that kind of privilege. In that sense, we're using privilege as lucky. You're lucky to be here because this is a fine school and so forth. But the minute you stop earning your right to be here, you've transitioned to that other form of privilege. The minute you assume you are owed something because you are a Taft student, you've lost. We owe each other things. I owe my students my best efforts, but I'm not owed anything I didn't earn. Neither are you. And this isn't just about Taft. I'm not even owed friendship. I should earn it. Those of you in the front row are undergoing the very stressful process of applying to college. Ideally, the place you enroll next year will have been a place you have earned. Sadly, that isn't universally true, which makes the process all the more stressful. When you go on to college, don't think you've stopped earning your place there. If you get married, don't think you've stopped earning the love of your spouse. If you have children, don't think you've stopped earning the love of your children. When you get a job, don't think you've stopped earning the right to do your best work. When we say you're privileged to come to Taft, we do mean lucky. But it can very easily become that other form of privilege, that toxic form of assumed authority without merit. I read an article by Adam Howard, a professor of education at Colby, about the toxic privilege that schools like Taft can create. He wrote the following: privilege is reinforced in every aspect of students' educational experiences. The school's ideals, missions and standards, admissions practices, interactions within classrooms, involvement in extracurricular activities, the rigors of a demanding curriculum, and participation in sporting competitions, social events, and rituals. Rituals in particular are effective in transmitting and reinforcing unspoken cultural expectations, behavioral norms and values that cultivate privilege as a collective identity and further impose hierarchies. That sound familiar? He goes on. The privilege lessons central to preserving and protecting the culture of elite schools go against what they commonly claim to teach students: positive and constructive social interactions, compassion, care towards others, high moral character, integrity, and responsible participation in the world. Many students who attend these schools go on to do great things and live out these values, but this doesn't excuse the bad behavior of your classmates. You should be on guard your whole lives about assuming the world owes you something because you went to a certain school, have a certain income, do a certain job. You should approach every day with the idea you need to earn it. Oh, and while you're at it, know that it's okay if some days you don't. That will happen. I'm not always the best teacher, the best friend, the best husband, the best father I can be. Of course not. But I'll try. I'll wake up tomorrow and work to earn it again. As I was writing this speech, the current political climate of this country kept intruding and adding footnotes. we elected a man to be president who, for the first time in our country's history, has zero experience working in the government. He was chosen over someone with a broad and deep resume, and it's difficult to think that the dynamics of the 2016 presidential race would have been the exact same if Hillary Clinton had been a man. We have assumptions about leadership that remain resolutely male. We bestow on men leadership attributes that they may or may not possess because they're male. I watched the Supreme Court hearings of Judge Kavanaugh. Leaving aside the issues surrounding Professor Ford's allegations, when Judge Kavanaugh shouted, "I went to Yale," I couldn't help but think about what privilege looks like. The past 2 weeks, we have seen an epidemic of violence. African Americans in a Kroger parking lot in Kentucky were gunned down. Prominent Democrats and media figures were mailed pipe bombs. A Jewish synagogue was attacked by a frothing anti-Semite. There is a common theme among these acts of violence, and that is that the perpetrators were all white men over the age of 40. In other words, they were people who looked a lot like me. It is much harder for white men to get what they want these days. The world is a changing place, and the old hierarchies are struggling to replicate themselves. Some of these changes are economic, some are racial, some revolve around gender, but they are changes, and for a certain segment of the population, armed, angry, and aggrieved, those changes have unleashed forces of violence. It's time for us to earn it again. All of it, all of us. We have to approach each day as an opportunity to earn the respect of those around us. We have to earn the right to be called honorable and good and just each day. We have to earn the right to be called friend. Because if we don't, we become poisoned by this idea we are owed something. And therefore, when we don't get it, we reach for the gun, the bomb, the burning cross, the swastika. If you think that sounds extreme, I humbly suggest you look at the news these days. We owe each other everything. Start there.